Gubernatorial Candidates Online Forum. I'm Susan Abbott, and along with Peter Youngbear, I'll be your moderator for this presentation of our candidates' ideas and positions. This forum is sponsored by the North Branch Dems and the Washington County Democratic Committee. And in addition to the folks joining us in Zoom tonight, the forum will be live streaming on the Facebook pages of the Windsor County Democratic Committee, the Orleans County Democratic Committee, and Washington County Democrats. I want to thank all the volunteers who made this event possible, and a special thanks to our three candidates for joining us. And before we begin our questions, I wanted to give you a brief introduction to our three candidates. Rebecca Holcomb is an educator who's been a classroom teacher and a school administrator. She was Vermont's Secretary of Education from 2014 to 2018. Rebecca lives in Norwich. Pat Winburn has been a trial attorney since 1987. He's also worked as a mediator and is past president of the board of directors for the Vermont Trial Lawyers Association, and Pat lives in Bennington. David Zuckerman has been Vermont's lieutenant governor since 2016. He previously served in the Vermont House of Representatives for 6 terms and the Vermont Senate for 2. David is also a farmer and lives in Heinsberg. Now, Peter Youngbear will explain the format for tonight's forum. Peter.
Thank you, Susan. My job is to explain how this is going to work for the evening. After opening remarks from each of the candidates for the first hour, Susan and I will alternate asking the candidates questions. These questions have been culled from those sent to us in advance of the forum. All three candidates will answer each question. They will each have 2 minutes to respond, and we will have a timekeeper who will ring a bell, and I don't know if we can ring it, that would be good, when you have 15 seconds left. The moderators will then tell you when the time is up. There will be no rebuttals. Candidates will rotate. First, Rebecca Holcomb, then Pat Winburn, then David Zuckerman. For the next round, Pat will go first, and for the third round, David, and so on throughout the night. For the last half hour, we will ask questions submitted during the first hour from our Zoom participants on the chat board. So if you are in the Zoom room, you can submit additional questions. And with that, let me introduce Rebecca Holcomb for opening remarks. Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Susan, and also Linda and everybody else who made it possible to be here tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. I want to start by asking everybody here to think about a time and the feeling you had when at the end of the day, you were really tired from a day of work maybe, tired and there's still things that need to be done. And maybe you've had that feeling when you've been working so hard all day and there's still more to do and you just can't figure out how to make things work. I bring that up because I want you to think about a mom I know, someone who I spoke to not too long ago. And what she told me is that she was taking care of 2 kids by herself on her own. And the child, it was her own child and the child of her sister who was struggling with addiction. She told me that she worked very long hours as a home health aide, caring for other people, but for minimum wage. She was worried the water coming out of her tap was toxic. And she started tearing up and told me that she wasn't sure how she could earn enough to feed 2 teenage boys. This mom was doing absolutely everything she could, but it was as if no matter how hard she tried, she was sinking. And no matter how hard she tried, she just got even farther behind. And I say that because that is the feeling I am getting from so many of the Vermonters I'm meeting with right now. So what do people want from leadership right now? What I'm hearing is they just want to know that they're going to be okay. When I was Secretary of Education, my job was to build an agency back after an effective 40% cut in state funding. I had to bring people together and make sure that we had an organization that could get the job done for Vermonters. Right now, we face crises on multiple fronts. We have a health crisis. We have a climate crisis. We have an economic crisis and a social justice crisis. And the reason Phil Scott has gotten high marks for his handling of this crisis at hand is because he's making people feel okay. But that's only one piece of our solution, because Vermonters need leadership that reassures them, but they also need a leader who is dedicated and has the executive and managerial experience necessary to end our crises and move Vermont forward to a place of resiliency, forward thinking, and fairness for all. And that is why I'm running for governor. I want to be your governor so I can tackle these and move us from crisis management into creating a bright and prosperous future.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. We'll now move to Pat Winburn. Pat, you're on.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you to Linda and Susan as well. I'm a proud Democrat from Bennington. I have lived in Bennington County since 1986, and I live in Bennington with my wife, my two dogs, and I'm a proud grandfather of one and father of two. I have approached the whole process differently because I'm not a member of the legislature. I'm not a member of any administration. I'm an outsider. And I think this year is a year of the outsiders. We've got a stable genius for our president, and he has to go. I don't know how many of you have listened to the news today and lately. I'm sure a lot of you, but we can't have another 4 more years of Donald Trump. And we can't have another 2 years of Phil Scott. As Rebecca mentioned, Phil Scott is he talks a lot, and he tries to make people feel comfortable about their situation. There's nothing comfortable about the situation that we're all in. The coronavirus is deadly, and it's wreaked havoc across the state and across the nation. And we need a governor who's going to be in charge and not just talk. And I think that that's the problem in Montpelier, is that people talk. And, I've talked too, but I'm not part of Montpelier. And I really would like to see things get done. I've been a lawyer, a trial lawyer for nearly 4 decades. And I've tried over 75 jury trials in the state of Vermont. And one of the things that lawyers do is we get things done. We go to court, we present our evidence, we cross-examine people, and then we get a ruling. But we do get things done. And, this is a year that we need to get things done and accomplished for the state of Vermont. In my capacity as a trial lawyer, I've served as a president of the Vermont Trial Lawyers Association. I'm a current board member of the Vermont Trial Lawyers Association. I'm listed in Best Lawyers in America and listed in other publications like that. Martindale Hubbell, I'm rated AV, which is the highest rating you can get. But I'd like to take all of those years of experience and the things that I've learned through trying cases over the last nearly 4 decades, and put them to work for people in Vermont. And that's why I'm running to be your governor, and I hope to be your governor on August 11th.
Thank you, Pat. And for last of the opening remarks, David Zuckerman. David, you're on.
Thank you, Peter. Great to see you again. And Susan and Linda and all the other organizers. Before this started, it sounded like you had quite a team putting this together. And thanks for everyone joining us tonight. As many of you are aware, but maybe not everybody, I'm David Zuckerman. I'm your current Lieutenant Governor. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I served for 14 years in the House, including a couple years as the chair, a couple terms as the chair of Agriculture. And I served for 4 years in the Senate before having the opportunity to serve as your Lieutenant Governor. And it's been an incredible honor and pleasure to serve the people of Vermont for these years and really bring the issues that Vermonters have cared about to the forefront. I was very involved with helping lead the way on progressive school funding, marriage equality, GMO labeling, raising the minimum wage, criminal justice reform, climate crisis mitigation, and so much more. And it's that work of getting issues through by working with Vermonters and the legislature That's the track record that I bring and would like to bring to being your governor, to bring more issues to the forefront that people have been talking about. I want to start with the fact that as a farmer and small business owner, I recognize what a lot of folks are going through. Our farm has struggled with the diminished markets at the farmer's market due to COVID-19. Many small business owners are struggling because of the lack of customers, because of the coronavirus that's required all of us to change our living completely in this era. Understanding what small business owners are going through is something that I will bring to the Lieutenant Governor's office to make sure we address these issues in a way that helps solve small business owners' problems and challenges in this era. My work as Lieutenant Governor expanded on my work as a legislator, bringing people's voices into the process. As Lieutenant Governor, I've traveled the state working and talking with folks in rotaries, in schools, in libraries, in church basements about how to really expand their voice in the process. And Vermonters are crying out for help. They are struggling right now, but even more so under the COVID-19 crisis. Working Vermonters are experiencing economic struggles that have only been amplified by this pandemic. You have to remember, half of Vermont was living paycheck to paycheck before the pandemic started. And while our current administration has reacted well, the citizens of Vermont have worked well in collaboration to really flatten the curve. And I think all Vermonters deserve appreciation for the work we've done in a community mindset. But they have to not forget that going into this administration vetoed policies that actually would have put Vermonters in a stronger place going into the COVID crisis. He vetoed the minimum wage. He's vetoed paid family leave. He hasn't invested in broadband, which we know now more than ever was critical for education, which many Vermonters didn't get, and for the opportunity for economic redevelopment, which we're going to need going forward. We need proactive leadership. And as your Lieutenant Governor and as a legislator, I was at the forefront on those issues that took years to pass, but you needed to start talking about them with a vision for the future. And as your governor, I'm going to bring that vision into the governor's office and into the State House. So we're not just reacting well, as the governor has done, but so we're building Vermont for a stronger future. Our rural economy and agricultural systems could use support so that they are stronger and more resilient to these storms, as well as for the food we need in these situations where our food is disrupted, as it was in March. We need better housing, better weatherized housing, so that folks who are living in struggling situations don't go cold in the winter because we haven't weatherized their homes. We could create jobs, weatherizing homes, and building a rural climate future. As your governor, I'm going to lead. I'm going to bring people into the process to put more money in their pockets, as I've done before. I'm going to work to build an economy that puts Vermonters back to work with jobs that pay enough to get by and live on in dignity. I'm going to work to support the youth voices and many of us who have been speaking out for a long time around the climate crisis and build that rural climate economy. We're going to expand healthcare. Think about it. During this crisis, universal healthcare with a contagious disease became the norm. We have to move forward and build a universal healthcare system, not just for the pandemic, but for our economic future in Vermont. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to say thank you for having me. I look forward to the debate, and I look forward to your votes. You can even cast them right now if you've got your ballot at home, and through August 11th for the primary. And then I'm ready to take on Governor Scott and change the governorship and leadership so that we can have a vision for Vermont, not just a reactive governor.
Thank you. Now turn this over to Susan, who will ask the first question of the evening. Again, 2 minutes apiece, no rebuttals. Thank you. Susan.
Yeah, I just want to make a note that if you have a question, if you're in the Zoom meeting, send it to everyone rather than me, because actually somebody else in our staff is monitoring those questions. So he will see that if you send it to everyone. So Mary Alice, you please resend your question so it's to everyone. Okay, our first question is, the COVID-19 pandemic has presented many challenges for Vermont. Governor Phil Scott has received high marks from some for his handling of the situation. How would you have handled it differently? And please be specific. And this is for Pat, then David, then Rebecca.
Well, I think that Governor Scott has done a reasonable job at handling the COVID crisis. But what else has he done? Really nothing. And you know, I think that Governor Cuomo from New York is really a model for how to deal with the COVID crisis. He sort of put the clamps on everything from the beginning, and I think that Governor Scott also has abdicated his responsibility from Montpelier by putting the burden on local community leaders and towns and villages throughout the state with regard to wearing of masks. He has told the towns and villages, the select boards, and the city councils, look, you decide what to do, and that's not leadership. Governor Scott is no leader. He goes along and he, has his conferences 3 times a week, which is fine. But we have to remember, that Phil Scott really is a Trump Republican. He headlines fundraisers with Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. He ran his first state Senate campaign on a platform of opposing civil unions. He vetoed family leave. He's continued signing contracts with private out-of-state prison groups that warehouse prisoners. He's chronically underfunded higher education. And I think that, what people have to realize is that this is a change election. Donald Trump can't have 4 more years. Governor Scott can't have 2 more years, or we're headed down the rabbit hole that Trump's been bringing us down for the last 3.5 years. I think we have to be united. I think we have to tell it like it is, and I think we have to confront Phil Scott on the policies that he has perpetrated or not perpetrated by really basically doing nothing other than being a nice guy, which I'm sure he is, and going along to get along. So I think that this is a year to be done with Phil Scott. It's a year to be done with Donald Trump.
What is the question?
Okay, David Zuckerman, you are next on that question.
Well, thank you. Again, I, like others, I think around the state, do feel the governor's done a very commendable job. But it's important to recognize that he did a commendable job because he listened to the medical professionals, and many of us saw this around the world, pointing out that we need. Is anybody else getting an echo?
Yes.
I'm not sure why that just started. Maybe somebody. Okay, well, in any case, the governor
Please mute. Everyone, please mute. That's what causes the echo. Please mute. Thank you.
All righty. And I would ask the timer to jingle the bell more in front of the microphone because we haven't been hearing it. But in any case, so if I might start over, the governor has done a pretty good job. There's no doubt about it. But it's really been because he's listened to the medical experts. If you look at governors around the country that have done what medical experts have said, that's where the coronavirus has been pushed back down relative to those states that have let it go crazy as we're seeing right now. So it isn't that Governor Scott was some genius. It's that he listened to the medical experts, and that's what we need to do with coronavirus going forward. But he really didn't set the state up well to deal with this situation. As I said earlier, vetoing the minimum wage means people were in a more financially precarious position. He also, if I were to do things differently, which was part of the question, I would include, for instance, the lieutenant governor in conference calls with regular updates of what's going on around the state. Early on in the pandemic, I reached out to the governor and his folks, and I said, I am more than happy to stand behind the governor right at the beginning of this pandemic and show that we are a unified front, regardless of political partisanship or party labels, because this pandemic is a nonpartisan issue. And his administration said, that won't be necessary. We've already got the speakers lined up. I said, I didn't ask to speak. I said, I want to stand with the governor in this terrible, tragic time as we inform Vermonters of the drastic changes that are coming. And they said that won't be necessary. So as governor, I think what you need to do in a situation like this is include all the people that should be included and more. So as he was talking about schools, as he was talking about childcare and early education, as he's been talking about businesses, He needed to bring far more of those experts into the conversation. And that's what I was doing as Lieutenant Governor with roundtables during March and April, having conversations with teachers and early educators and small business owners and restaurant owners saying, how would you do things differently? What do you need? And you have to have those conversations in order to have the reopening plans work better than they have been, not as sudden 2-day notices for your schools or for your childcare centers, where I've heard they were told yes to air conditioners, no to fans, wait, yes to fans, no to air conditioners. And they actually have gone out and spent money that they didn't have on things they didn't need because the system kept changing on them. So those are some key issues, but most importantly, the UI system was a complete mess. And on the one hand, there's the system was set up a long time ago, it's not his fault. That is true to a point. But when the first week came and 15,000 people signed up and swamped the system, that is when you go into triage mode to solve the problem. And it took weeks and weeks before they really did anything significantly differently. I mailed a letter to the Commissioner of Unemployment and said, can you get the National Guard in, just get folks' names and social security numbers and address and cut them a check. You can square up with later payments, but people are desperate. I got a call from a person in the Northeast Kingdom who said, I've done the governor's orders. We've been without support for 4 weeks. My kids have food because of the schools, and I want to thank our educators in our schools for doing that amazing job of getting food to those families. But he said, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Now, something's wrong with the system when someone listens to the orders of the governor and runs out of food. He was devastated. He lives in the Northeast Kingdom, and there are a lot of people like him, he said, who have supported the governor in the past that won't be supporting him again because the UI system was not working.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear the bell. I apologize.
No, I've been asking to get Rini to get unmuted so we could hear the bell. I saw her waving it. So, Linda, could you unmute Rini and then we can hear the bell? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Rebecca, what would you do differently than Governor Scott has in handling the pandemic?
Thank you, Susan. It's a good question. And crises demand clear action and anticipation. When the governor first announced that he thought we'd have a state of emergency, many people in the education community were already talking about the probability that schools would be closed. What he needed to do was right away tell every system across the state to begin anticipating and planning for that eventuality so that they would have lead time. Instead, they literally had 2 days of notice before they had to go virtual. What this meant is they didn't have time to adequately plan proactively to address issues of equity before they went virtually. And that's something that with a little bit of lead time, we could have done a better job. The other candidates have mentioned the unemployment insurance system. It was a disaster. It should have been anticipated the minute he declared a state of emergency and we anticipated closure, that we would not be able to cope with the volume of claims. We couldn't cope with it in Irene, and that was a geographically contained incident or demand. So this was obviously going to be statewide and much greater. In contrast, Governor Gina Raimondo in Rhode Island worked with her team and in 10 days put together a cloud-based unemployment insurance system that serves 70,000 people on its first day of operation. In contrast, I've spoken with people who still haven't received unemployment compensation here in Vermont. We need solutions. We need proactive anticipation to create the solution so people aren't left struggling. With respect to the Department of Health, we are lucky in this state because our Department of Health is staffed by extremely competent, hardworking, and smart individuals who understand epidemiology and know how to keep us safe. My concern is, are there enough of them? Because we know that currently in their budget, they have about 340 fewer employees than they did in 2008. This is the team that is going to keep us safe, particularly when, as Governor Scott is pushing, we are opening up schools, universities, childcares, and businesses across the state in the fall. Does the Department of Health have sufficient support and sufficient staffing to be able to respond to potentially multiple outbreaks simultaneously in different parts of the state? We need to know that. And if he's planning to flex by pulling people internally off of their current jobs to meet this needs, what other critical health priorities will not be addressed? These are critical issues that affect Vermonters' welfare, and we need to be anticipating and planning for it. The last thing, because I think I'm running out of time is with the issue of business support. We know that when the PPP went out, that businesses, particularly minority-owned and woman-owned businesses that didn't have strong existing relationships with lenders or lines of credit, were often left out in the cold. When Governor Scott mailed what I would call a postcard of a plan, because it wasn't a fully developed plan that the legislature could act on, it didn't account for that. And if we want to be equitable, if we want to ensure that we're protecting the interests of our communities of color, our minority-owned businesses, and our women-owned businesses, we need to anticipate that. And thankfully, the legislature did make some changes to hold out funds to be available for those purposes, particularly for individuals who were not addressed in the initial round. So those are some of the kinds of issues that I would address. I agree with the other candidates that we need to have a statewide mandate on masks, because masks aren't just about suppressing a surge, it's also about preventing one from happening in the first place. We need to mask up to open up.
Thanks so much to all three of you. I'll turn it over to Peter now for the next question.
Yeah, thank you. Other than COVID-19, we've heard next to nothing about meeting other healthcare needs of Vermonters. The high cost of healthcare, the current state initiative with an accountable care organization that is failing, or even universal healthcare. Many Vermonters in low-paying positions are saddled with prohibitively high deductibles, forcing them to avoid going to doctor's offices or the clinic. What is your vision for healthcare, and how would you achieve it? And I believe it's David first this time.
Well, thank you. As I mentioned in my opening, we found that during COVID, the concept of universal healthcare was suddenly first and foremost. Everybody should get tested free of charge. People should get healthcare for COVID free of charge, because we wanted to make sure everybody was treated as quickly as possible and wouldn't affect others. This is a mindset shift that we can work on going forward towards the concept of universal healthcare. I met with some business owners a number of months ago when we could meet face to face, and they talked about how they had set up free primary care with a couple other business owners for all of their employees. And with free primary care, they found that their employees were accessing healthcare more quickly and at lower cost, and they were getting back to work more quickly. And so we should start with universal primary care, and that would actually save us money and keep Vermonters healthier. We need to move towards a full-fledged universal healthcare system, but that's the first step, because when we start to show we can save money and provide better outcomes, we can expand that. We have to look at healthcare well beyond the care once you're sick. It's more about prevention. It's about healthy food. It's about safe and affordable housing so that people are warm enough in the winter. It's about weatherizing seniors' homes and working class people's homes so that they actually get less prone to get sick. And it's about food security. It's about housing, and it's about education. Inequity is at the core of most of the healthcare challenges that we face. And we have to be working on an economy that works for all, so that not only is it about housing and food, but it's about folks not living on the edge. One area where we could either make primary care universal or more accessible for everybody is through expanding the FQHCs. Sounds like I got 15 seconds. And I would add that we also have to adjust reimbursement rates for primary care doctors and independent doctors. Right now, the big institutions get a better rate of pay from the insurance companies than independent docs who are working in the rural areas offering that primary care. So we need to address all of these issues, bring it together, and that's going to be good for Vermonters, and it's going to be good for expanding economic opportunity and entrepreneurship. And we have great minds in Vermont that are ready to go forward.
Thank you. Rebecca, you're next.
Thank you. This is an issue I heard about more than just about any other issue. We know that there are people who are turning down wage increases because they're afraid of losing Medicaid. We know people don't go to the doctor because they're afraid of the bill they might get. We absolutely need universal care. It has to be where we go. But the reality is we also tried single payer and we couldn't figure out how to do it because we couldn't figure out how to make it affordable. And so the first thing we need to do is get ahead of the cost so that we can move to the universal care that we need. Because I want to do it, but I know we need to make some changes before we can get there so we can actually realize it. The first one is payment reform. We have ambitious legislation in our books already, thank you to the Democratic legislature, for putting out an ambitious program for payment reform. This would compensate and reward our doctors for keeping patients healthy. I've spoken to hospitals in the initial pilots that are talking about food programs, talking about ways to provide support for families to keep them healthy in the first place. Because when they're healthy, they save money and they are more prosperous themselves. And in fact, if Governor Scott had done what he was supposed to do and accessed the federal dollars available to support payment reform, many of our hospitals and primary care providers would not have been going bankrupt during this recent COVID crisis and shutdown. So that's something we have to do. We also have to address some of our workforce challenges. We're at a really critical point in the state where we may not have the primary care and other doctors and nurses and other medical staff that we need to take care of, particularly our aging population. We also know that we have kids graduating from high school with 2 years of community college credit and an LNA that they can use to go right to work. Instead of paying people to move here, let's pay to give Vermonters the skills they need to get not a minimum wage job, but a living wage job, a good job that pays well, and that meets a critical need in our hospitals. Right now, our hospitals are paying traveling nurses to come from out of state who get 2 to 3 times as much as a Vermont employee would. So it costs us an arm and a leg, and they take what they earn home to wherever they came from. So we're paying more to get less, and we're losing that value to our Vermont economy. We also need to beat down on the cost of pharmaceuticals. There are very exciting opportunities happening on the West Coast where states are banding together to do what our federal government has failed to do, which is to get scale so you can get some leverage in negotiations on pharmaceutical pricing. We can't wait for the federal government because Vermonters need solutions right now. And I'll be working on that as well. Thank you.
Pat, your turn.
Well, healthcare for all is not only a right for Vermonters, or should be a right for Vermonters, it's our moral responsibility. We have Joe Biden, who is about to be president, I believe, and was a Bernie Sanders supporter and a delegate for Bernie Sanders at the state convention. And Bernie Sanders has promoted health care for all and universal health care. But I think that the people in Washington are in November when Biden's elected, I think that we're going to have some federal solutions. I think we're going to help Obamacare to become better. And, I think that it becomes a lot more poignant for people who've gone through health care scares and health scares. My wife 5 years ago was diagnosed with adenocarcinoma, which, lung cancer that had metastasized, that had spread. And, it was a pretty hopeless feeling. The doctor said she had 6 months to live and that, she had good health care through our mom and pop law office on Main Street, not in Wall Street. And we provide health care for all of our employees. But, people should have universal health care, and there should be health care for all, so people don't have to go through the same kind of experience that my wife did. Fortunately, my wife is now a cancer survivor, and she has done well with the immunotherapy treatments that the doctors have provided for her. But I think healthcare for all should be right, and it would be under a Winburn administration.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Now turn it back over to Susan for the next round of questions.
And we're going to turn now to the environment. Our question is, as governor, how do you plan on creating the jobs we need for moving off fossil fuels and into a Green New Deal society, and to pay for water quality initiatives that are so vital here, such as cleaning up Lake Champlain? Also, how will, I'm sorry, that was my timer that went off. And also, do you support or oppose Ridgeline wind projects? So it's kind of a two-parter there. And first we have Rebecca, then Pat, then David.
So the first question is how we get off fossil fuels. This has to be
Yeah. Create jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, and create jobs. I mean, so there are about 5 questions there. So the first question was, how do we make the green energy transition that we know we need to make? And right now, my priorities are green energy, local energy, and renewable energy. It has to be all 3. That's how we create economic opportunity for Vermonters as we make this transition. Right now, the state spends about $3 billion out of state every year on on energy, just generally, including Hydro-Quebec. These are dollars that leave the Vermont economy. It's part of why we don't have a robust economy the way we could, because we spend so much every year on out-of-state energy. If we took even a portion of that and invested it in local renewables created in our communities, including through community renewable energy projects that allowed people who are less wealthy to buy in and be part of this green energy transition, we would be beginning to make the transition we need to make. As Secretary of Education, I worked very hard to start career pathways. These are pathways that help young people, when they're still in middle school and high school, begin to think about what are the job opportunities that lie ahead of them in the Vermont economy that actually pay them good wages, so that when they leave high school, if they choose to go into work or choose to go into a college program, they know where they're headed and where it's going to take them, because many students can't afford to do otherwise. And we know that when we create opportunities for our graduates to get industry recognized credentials in green energy jobs, that they can walk out and earn good jobs that create good wages. We need to do this not only because this is a place where there could be huge demand, but it's also a place where we're bringing money back into the state in ways that create revenues here and help fund some of the other activities we want to support. The reason this isn't happening is because Governor Scott has been throttling back, particularly on renewable, through his regulatory processes. And we've seen actually declines in the amount of new renewable projects that are being permitted. As governor, I would make raising tier 2 production of local renewable energy a top priority. You also talked about water quality, and this is a really critical issue. And I would say that there's several pieces of this. We need to pay to keep our water clean, because the health impacts, particularly on some of our less wealthy Vermonters or on Vermonters who live in places where they are literally being poisoned by some of the toxins in our water, are huge. And there are also costs. So when we talk about the cost of cleaning up the lake, we're not accounting for the cost of healthcare, the cost to our tourism industry of declining and depleted natural resources. But frankly, we're also at a place in the state where we're going to have a hard conversation about what we put into water in the first place. We know that PFAS, the forever chemicals, once we introduce them into our water system, are impossible to take out. And so one of the things that we have to do as a state is have hard conversations about what toxins we let in the water in the first place.
And just in 10 seconds, do you support or oppose ridgeline wind projects?
I think that there are now new ecological guidelines around where it's appropriate, and there are places where it's not appropriate to do it on the ridge lines. And I'd want to know what the environmental standards were for placing it, because there are vibrant local ecosystems, and there's evidence now that perhaps above certain levels it's not appropriate because the ecosystems are too fragile.
Right. Thank you. Pat, so the question, which is a bit complicated, is how do you plan on creating the jobs we need to move into a Green New Deal society? How do you pay for water quality initiatives? And do you support or oppose ridgeline wind projects?
Well, I support the ridgeline solar or wind energy power proposals that have been going on, but I think that it's also a local decision. It's appropriate in some communities, and in some communities it's not appropriate. And I don't think that there's just one answer for everybody in the state. For some people, it's a good thing, and then for other people, it's just a blight on the local forests and the communities and the ridgelines. But while many in my party have been hesitant to say it, I'll be clear. I support taxing carbon emissions and using that money to invest in renewable energy. If we accept the fact that climate change is real, and everybody, all the experts agree, the real experts agree that climate change is real, then we need to take meaningful steps to address it. Fossil fuels are responsible for 90% of all the carbon dioxide emissions. And renewable alternatives are cheap and plentiful, yet over 80% of the world's energy comes from these fossil fuels. I think that there are jobs to be had in solar and also in wind, but we also have to have a broad view about implementing what in Vermont would be sort of the Vermont Paris climate agreement. They will create jobs, and we will have solar power, and we will have electric cars and those kinds of things in a Windburn administration.
Thank you. And David, same three questions.
Yeah, well, no, thank you very much for this question. The environment and the climate crisis has been at the core of my soul for almost 30 years of activism at UVM through my political activities. And it's incorporated in how I farm with cover crops, working to sequester carbon and build organic matter in our soils. If we're going to tackle the climate crisis, it's got to be an all hands on deck approach. And with those leadership work in the legislature on many of those issues, I earned the Renewable Energy Vermont Legislator of the Year Award in 2013. And this campaign, I've recently received the endorsements of Rights and Democracy and the Sierra Club, who are both very focused on climate issues and renewable energy. That's because of the work I've done and the knowledge I have around these issues. In the energy issue, under Phil Scott's administration, we've lost over 500 solar installation jobs. That was before COVID-19. These are good paying jobs distributed all across the state, livable wages, and saving people money when they get those installations. But it takes more than just tax credits to have installation of solar and small scale wind and other renewable energy projects. I've long supported a Green Mountain New Deal where we would actually sequester the president's tax cut for the wealthiest Vermonters, which would be a way to generate revenue to invest in green energy without it being as regressive. We have to make sure if we do a tax on carbon that we return those resources to working rural class Vermonters who are struggling to get by. And we can do that, but it means less money for that investment in solar and renewable energy and weatherization. With the Green Mountain New Deal, we could invest in broadband, which would help climate crisis because people would commute less. We're actually one of the highest per capita commuting states in the country. We could invest in weatherizing, particularly seniors' homes and working class Vermonters' homes, which would not only save them money and have better health outcomes because their homes would be sealed better, but would also give them more money in their pocket day in and day out with lower energy bills that they could then feed their families better and invest in their future. We could also do more around investing in affordable housing in village centers and cluster that so that we actually have development patterns that are more environmentally friendly and develop local economies and redevelop local economies in our rural areas. One of the main reasons I even got into this race was our rural economy and the climate crisis. And these issues come together beautifully to both fight the climate crisis and rebuild our rural economy. We have to expand food production and local food resilience. And we could do that by investing in food processing and food storage. Our Vermonters can grow more food, but storing it so that we have food like we needed in March when food suddenly went bare is a real pinch point. If we built more processing and storage, farmers would expand their production and we would be more resilient. And as farmers do better, they can do more cover crops and practices that sequester carbon. Sorry, I didn't hear the bell once again, but thank you.
Now let's turn this over to Peter.
Proposing the appropriations bill, the annual state budget, is probably any governor's biggest responsibility. What do you see as the biggest issue facing the state budget, and how do you plan to address it? And we go first to Pat.
Well, the biggest issue facing the state budget is the devastation that the coronavirus has wreaked on the state and the state budget. But we've had announcements in the last few weeks from Senator Sanders and Senator Leahy and Congressman Welch that there is federal help on the way. And so, it's not a matter of just relying on the federal government. I mean, the state government is also going to have to come up with creative ways to deal with the budget deficit. One of the ways, one of my local senators, Senator Dick Sears, has proposed, and Governor Scott has rejected is taxing pot. If pot's going to be legal, then pot should be taxed, just like alcohol or hard liquor, that kind of thing. And it's one source of revenue that we're missing out on. Canada has done it, Colorado has done it, Massachusetts has done it, and we're missing the boat. And I think that drug abuse is a terrible problem. And I think a portion of that, the fund that's created by taxing pot should be used to educate our children in Vermont to make sure that they understand the dangers and the hazards that drug abuse can wreak on the young people and older people as well. But I also think that there are some creative solutions to the problem, and they have to be debated in a deliberative process and then acted upon. And that's, I think it is a very serious problem, and one that
15 seconds.
And one that we would try to control.
David, you're up second this time.
Sure, and I want to finish the last question because I recognize I didn't address the Ridgeline question, and I know Susan wants to make sure we answer that. So I have supported the full gamut of renewable energy because if we do not solve our climate crisis problem, then critical habitats and sensitive areas are going to be devastated by the warming of our planet anyway. We're not going to have the ecosystems on the peaks of our mountains relative to Virginia weather, which is going to be present in Vermont over the next couple of decades. Just look at what's happened already in this May and June. And we clearly also need to look at the science of where it works, which is very few more ridgelines. So we're not talking about ridgeline wind everywhere, but where it will work, I think we also need to include it in the mix because it needs to be diversified. Now, with respect to the budget, there's a number of issues here. First of all, regardless of Mitch McConnell's ridiculous statement that the feds were not going to help our municipalities and our states, we know that Republicans and governors, as well as Democratic governors all across the country, are going to need that assistance. And I agree, as Pat said, that the federal government is going to come through and help with some. We've been very fortunate that some of our sales tax revenue has been higher than we thought it was going to be, but we're still way behind on what we need for education. I would look at bonding to help fill the gap, because I do think that when you have an extreme situation like this, you need to spread that pain over a longer time in order not to do austerity budgeting, which is what the governor wants to do. The governor proposed cutting as much as almost 2,000 teachers in education by doing across the board cuts in education. Doing that is the failure pattern for rebuilding our economy. We have to keep investing in the infrastructure, which is not only physical infrastructure, but our kids for our economy of tomorrow. We also need to look at, as Pat said, cannabis reform, which I've been working on for 20 years. It's insane that we have an underground system that doesn't pay into our broader society, including the cost it takes, like prevention and others, to try to reduce abuse of various drugs. But the war on drugs is a failure, and we should bring a tax and regulate system in, much like we have with craft beer, which would not only increase sales and taxes from the product, but actually increase tourism as well. And we know that's a key piece of Vermont's economy. So I would look at temporary taxation on the wealthiest. I would look at bonding. I would look at expanding the cannabis economy and investing in our future, not austerity budgeting.
Thank you. And last on this question, Rebecca Holcomb.
I also agree that we have been stuck in a mindset of austerity. And if we've learned nothing from the last recession, it's that during a recession, if we practice austerity, we actually delay our recovery. So now is not the time to, as Phil Scott tried to do, force across the board budget cuts in schools. It's certainly not the time to massively be cutting across state budget without understanding who would be hurt the most and how that would impact the recovery in Vermont. I would say we need to do a number of things here. First of all, we need to figure out what are the most important supports that we need to make sure that Vermonters are safe. We need to stop talking about the COVID crisis as something that's happening in these couple months and understand it is probably going to be here for the foreseeable future until we have a robust vaccine that reduces the risk. So we need to be prepared for the new norm, which is coping in this crisis. And we need to be thinking about what are the most important priorities of state government that we need to target our resources. You know, this is is a state that taxes somewhat progressively. I actually agree that we need to be looking at new sources of revenue, and particularly from people who can afford to pay more. But we also need to be targeting progressive spending. There are many places in state government where we're actually aggressive in how we spend. And there are people who can get by without a child care voucher now to make sure that somebody who is an acute need and a frontline worker has access to the high quality, affordable care that they need. We also need to be thinking differently across sectors in terms of how we partner, maybe reduce our physical imprint in ways that preserve jobs and preserve services. We don't need maybe as many physical structures as we do when we've got empty space, for example, in our schools. In fact, some of the most promising partnerships I've seen have been when school districts are partnering with private childcare providers to use empty space in schools to provide affordable childcare at a much lower price, and also pay our childcare and early educators more. So there are ways to work together across sectors to do this. And I also would not rule out bonding because these are unusual times, and this is an extraordinary opportunity to invest in our transition to a green energy future, but also to address some of our critical priorities around broadband and housing.
Susan, you've got the next question.
I do. This is for David, then Rebecca, then Pat. What problems do you think we have with racial injustice in Vermont? And if elected, what would you do specifically to solve them? David, Rebecca, then Pat.
Well, first we have to recognize this has been an ongoing issue, unfortunately, for centuries. And I'm really excited to see the groundswell of support as I hear from senior, longtime civil rights activists. They are feeling a better energy now than they even felt at any peak point of the 60s and the civil rights era, because we've got businesses adjusting their practices, taking stands, whether it's around Facebook and investing there and others. And as a state, we need to make sure the voices that are out there, the people who are affected, are fully included in the discussions, in the solutions. My administration will be far more inclusive than any administration has been in the past. We need to make sure those voices are at the table from the get-go. As Lieutenant Governor, I've had an open office and brought many people from all walks of life into the State House to really expand folks' voice in the system. We need to make sure all are welcome, those who are born here, those who are indigenous to Vermont, and those who move here. We need to make sure we lift up women in leadership, indigenous Vermonters, communities of color, LGBTQIA Vermonters, rural Vermonters, and Vermonters of all religions and with disabilities and of different socioeconomic classes. But we really have to attack some of these key fundamental policy arenas. Ones like law enforcement, where the legislature just changed the Criminal Justice Council or Training Council in order to include voices that don't focus on law enforcement always being the first solution to challenges in our community, but others who could be trained around community building and de-escalation. We need to move, as Al Sharpton has talked about, some of our law enforcement funding into mental health, into economic development, into various ways to uplift the economy of our community that has been held back by redlining, the GI Bill, the Tulsa Massacre, and the wealth inequality that exists in our society because of white supremacy. We need to look at our education system and make sure we're not just teaching about the white men who have made history in our country, but really the incredible diversity of our country and the fact that our wealth and economy was built on the backs of our BIPOC communities. That community deserves the benefit of that work, and we need to work towards reparations and looking at ways to improve the economy well-being for our BIPOC communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca, you're next on this one.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, David, for talking about the importance of elevating women in power. That's part of why I'm running for governor, because I think that as a state, when our leadership reflects the diversity of the state, we're all better off. There are more voices at the table, and we see different priorities come forward, frankly. So I do look forward to running for governor and winning this race. One of the things that I think earned me the endorsement of Sunrise Middlebury was that I said that my commitment that you can't have environmental justice without racial justice as well. And that in my administration, I would evaluate all proposals that came forward, both through the lens of equity, but also through the lens of sustainability, because we need to be addressing this in every aspect of our operations. But I've also learned that addressing inequities, and particularly racial inequity and racial bias, has to be much more than ad hoc efforts. It has to be systematic, in part because when we are biased, we can't recognize when we're being racist. And I think about some of the young people I've worked with, some of the Black children like Julia Gennari, who told me what it's like to grow up in Vermont, where you are not allowed to be just a child, because no matter how much you want to play the violin, play a sport, and be a student, you are defined by your race. And I think about her every day because I see it as our responsibility to make sure she can grow up as a child and then become the person she wants to be. To do this, we need to start by gathering data, because you can't correct bias and disproportionality if you don't know where it exists. So as Secretary of Education, we went out of our way for every single report we put out to the legislature to break out our outcomes in terms of what the disproportionality was for different groups, particularly marginalized groups in the state. We also need to be aggressively pursuing more diversity in our hiring, because we need people in the state government who can reflect the changing face of the state, but also in our
8 seconds.
Oh shoot, this is such an important issue to me and I'm gonna run out of time. But as Secretary of Education, when I implemented this Every Student Succeeds Act, I'm very proud of the fact that we had a team whose only job was to make sure that the right voices were at the table. And we got input from over 2,500 Vermonters representing every county, every marginalized group in the state of Vermont. And when we were done, everybody could look at that plan. No one liked everything in it, even me, but everybody saw their voice in that plan. Because government help doesn't work for communities if they don't see themselves in it and if it isn't actually helpful to them. And that will be my commitment as your governor.
Thank you.
It's such an important. We all
You're
need
last up on this one.
All right,
Well,
Peter.
Well, Peter, I would appoint people of color cabinet, and I think that people of color should be involved in the government at every level. As a human being, I think it's my job to amplify the voices of those who are directly affected by systemic racism that exists everywhere. From our criminal justice system to education, to healthcare, and in every other aspect of our lives. We need bias training at every level of government in our communities so that we can begin acknowledging the problem and address it. Vermont prides itself in being the first state to outlaw slavery, but this claim is hollow if you look at our history. From our treatment of the Abenakis to the exploitation of migrant workers to driving while black, pullovers, racism is all around us, and I'll call it what it is, and I'll seek out the guidance of communities of color in my administration.
Thanks so much, Pat. Peter, you have the next question.
Thank you. This is the last one of this part of the forum, and then we'll move on to ones that we're seeing in the chat room. First up this time will be Rebecca, then Pat, then David. In what ways are you differ than the other candidates here tonight? Why should we vote for you versus them? Rebecca.
Thank you. I would say that two things distinguish me, really three things distinguish me. First of all, I've spent my career in public education. And when you work in public education, you work with very diverse communities to get them to come together and stand behind a budget. And that budget is a community's vision for the future. It's our instantiation of our values and our priorities and our hopes and dreams for our children. And that means you have to work with people across the aisle and from all different political parties and walks of life. And that's what I've done my whole life. And it's certainly the spirit I try to bring to working as Secretary of Education. The other is that my experience is in management. I have strong executive experience. I'm actually the only person running for governor right now who has worked in a state agency, who has coped with some of the defunding the agencies have been struggling with, and has figured out how to build a budget and rethink operations in ways that deliver for Vermonters despite scarcity of resources. Because right now we know the budgets are tight, and we made a real commitment at the Agency of Education to do things, first of all, with the goal of equity, and second, with the goal of efficiency, making sure we used every dollar as well well as we could to get the most value for Vermonters on the issues that mattered most. And that's what I'll do. That's my experience. The other issue is that as working as Secretary of Education, I've managed to travel to every community of the state, so have broad experience working with local municipalities around their priorities in education in particular, but also have strong experience putting together state budgets. I have robust experience building a budget that has been submitted to the legislature for review, and then working to help the legislature understand the potential implications and opportunities for any of the changes they might propose. And there's no one here who has done that. So those are some of the unique things that I think really recommend me for this office.
Thank you. Pat, you're second up on this one.
Well, my nearly 4 decades of work as a lawyer distinguishes me from the other candidates. I think that having that kind of a background and perspective gives you an outsider's view of what goes on the inside. I represented the powerless against the powerful for decades, and I've heard their problems, and I've represented them in court. I've gone after big companies, big insurance companies, and I think it's given me a perspective as to the problems that people have in Vermont that lets me see how the little guy is treated by the government. I've been a judge. I've been appointed in Bennington Superior Court as a Superior Court judge on a substitute basis. But I've seen how people are treated. I've seen how the justice system deals with people, and I think that there are gains that can be made. And on the other hand, too, I think that our justice system and our judicial branch of government is woefully underfunded. And I think that the people who work in that system would like to see a change, and they need an increase in the budget. An increase in the budget would help the people who work in the system, from the clerks to the public defenders, to the prosecutors, to the judges. And I think it's something that we have to do in the next 2 years.
Thank you. Finally, David, on this round.
Sure, thank you. I think there's a few things that set me apart in this conversation about beating Phil Scott and being the governor of Vermont. First of all is the diversity of experience that I have. I've started a small business, and I meet payroll with the income from the business, not just tax dollars, which is the case if you're running an education system. That's all tax money. You've got to really value the dollars of what businesses have to go through, and I've got that experience. I've also got 20 years of experience in the legislature working on passing bills and issues that affect everyday Vermonters all the time. I've gotten bills through the Judiciary Committee, Healthcare Committee, Agriculture Committee, tax bills, and economic development with the minimum wage. Working on that wide range of issues is really critical to having the background and experience you need to be governor, where you address not just one agency, but you've got multiple agencies with multiple different needs and interests and issues for Vermonters. I've also been a listener. I have traveled the state for 20 years, not just campaigning over the last 6 or 12 months, but actually as a policymaker for those 20 years. I didn't just stay in Burlington. I traveled the state and met with folks in Brattleboro and Bennington, St. Johnsbury, Bakersfield, all over the state, working on those issues, organizing with Vermonters, which is why one of the main reasons I think that Rights and Democracy endorsed me with hundreds of people across the state in order to take that experience and those connections around the state and bring it into the policy making. And as a farmer, I really understand the whole breadth of small businesses, but specifically agricultural and forestry businesses all across the state. I've been a member of the Farm Bureau for 20 years. I know dairy farmers, I know organic vegetable farmers and meat farmers. Understanding the rural economy is one of the best ways to build the rural economy. And when we look at the climate crisis and we look at the economic disparities in the state, it's rural Vermont that is where we've got the most challenges and the most opportunity. And my experience can build on those opportunities and rebuild our rural economy so we have a thriving Vermont for everyone.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Susan. We've been monitoring questions in the Zoom chat, and so Susan, on to you.
Yeah, and this round is Pat, David, and then Rebecca. So the question that has come in is, please respond to Auditor Doug Hoffer's recent report about OneCare, the ACO, and whether you think we're on the right course in solving healthcare issues in Vermont. Have you read the report and do you agree with its findings? So Pat, David, and Rebecca.
Well, I've read reports of the report, and I agree with its findings. I think that auditors play an important role in the functioning of state government, and I think that it's important that we keep looking at what our policies in a practical standpoint are doing to Vermonters. And I think that low-income Vermonters are especially susceptible to irregularities and problems, budgetary and otherwise, because they are the ones that suffer the most in what it is that they're dealing with. I think that low-income families need help, whether it's from the programs like family leave, which the governor has not supported and is basically vetoed, from the low-income families, and all families in Vermont also have to deal with the terrible opioid crisis. The opioid crisis is devastating families throughout Vermont, and I think that we have to keep control of the budget, and we have to keep control of the government. But I think it's also important that we have somebody on top of things at the top of the government, like the governor, who will make sure that everything is done on the up and up, and everything's fair and square.
Next is David.
Thank you. I think the Affordable Care Act and the Accountable Care Organization was certainly a stab at trying to address the issues in a new and coordinated way. I haven't yet seen the results that warrant continuing to spend $15 to $20 million a year moving in this direction. We saw in the last year, in 2019, that the Medicaid loss through ACO was 17.4 million. We spent more money, not less, in that regard, on top of the 20-odd million that we spent investing in the Accountable Care Organization. We need to look at spending money at the front end in prevention. And while the ACO is supposed to try and do that, it doesn't yet seem like it's been effective. We need to invest in our primary care facilities, in our FQHCs, in affordable housing, because we actually know that housing is one of the biggest determinants of health outcomes. And we need more affordable and safe and warm housing to deal with reducing our healthcare costs. We need free universal primary care. And I get that free is an interesting term because it is paid for by tax dollars. But when we've seen businesses and National Life invest in doing universal primary care, there has been a return on investment in some cases of 1 year, and certainly within 3 years, of saving money and keeping people healthier. So let's shift our direction towards the systems that are proving that they're working and invest in rural primary care, FQHCs, and really supporting the idea of maybe even private partnerships with some of these businesses that are creating affordable or universally accessible primary care. It's important to recognize that some of the bigger businesses can do this, but small businesses, my 10-person farm, we can't afford to set up a primary care healthcare plan. But if the state sets it up so that all small businesses can buy in, then it can become affordable for all of us to invest. I think Pat mentioned earlier that the universal healthcare bill was crushed, or maybe it was Rebecca, because of the supposed cost at a 12% payroll. When I talked to some of the bigger businesses and asked them, what are you currently paying on payroll for healthcare? They were in that range. So that rate was actually going to be similar to what they were paying. It was going to create universal healthcare for all Vermonters and would have started to drive down our costs by increasing primary care, which is the real focus of where we need to go.
Thank you. Rebecca.
So I just want to start by saying that when I was first appointed Secretary of Education, Doug Hoffer did an audit of some of our contracting procedures, and it was brutal, and it was such a gift because it helped us rethink our contracting procedures agency-wide in ways that got better value for Vermonters. So I think anytime Doug Hoffer writes a report, we're all wise to listen and look at what we can learn from make it better. I'm very concerned that people are confusing very poor implementation by the Scott administration with the failings of the ACO model overall. I spoke recently with a person who helped draft the proposal for single payer, and I agree. I want to be very clear. I believe in universal primary care. I believe that we need to be making that shift. But we have to address payment reform. As long as we are stuck in fee for service, there is no way to contain cost, and we will bankrupt ourselves as a state if we aren't figuring out how to get ahead of that and move to a value-based model where we actually compensate our doctors and our hospitals for keeping people healthy instead of writing lots of expensive referrals that treat them after they're already sick. That has to be what we do. And if we are attacking the ACO, we better have an alternative that we can afford to move, and we better make sure it's not just because the Scott administration has done a terrible job on implementation. I agree it's imperfect. I think the Green Mountain Care Board needs stronger regulatory oversight. But I also know that the purpose of moving payment form is also to get us to a universal, unified system that is the tracks. That is the incremental step that sets us up for universal primary care statewide. Because frankly, the more we fragment our system into one business here, one business there, the less affordable the whole system becomes for all of us. I'm totally open to piloting a model that takes out the third party. We see good models in Kaiser Permanente. There's a model in Utah that is experimenting with having a public option that you can get right through your hospital using the actuarial capacity of the hospital. I think it's a great way to pilot the transition that we all know we need to make, and I would certainly look at that as well.
Thanks so much. I'll turn it over now to Peter for another question from Zoom.
Yes, and I think David leads off on this one, then Rebecca, then Pat. So this question is, Vermont has an aging population. I think we're the second oldest state, soon to be the oldest state in the nation. What will you do to ensure services for our seniors to aid them to maintain as much independence and well-being as possible?
Well, thank you. I'm going to tie in something else to this conversation, which I think is critical, and it's our Vermont state colleges. We have to invest in our state colleges and focus the programs in the areas that we have need. Earlier, it was talked about the nursing shortage, and I think that's a huge issue. And to have more Vermonters trained and to fill those nursing positions so we have fewer travelers, money to be saved, and jobs for Vermonters. We need to invest in our Vermont state colleges in other senior and elder care services and programs. So again, Vermonters can get the training in either a four-year degree or a technical degree in helping seniors live and age in place. It's quite clear that when folks live in their own homes for more of the nearing an end of their life, they tend to stay healthier, they tend to stay more vibrant, and more than anything, their quality of life is greatly improved. We need to stop treating the end of life care as sort of a storage unit situation to one where we actually value our seniors. When you look to our Native American indigenous communities, they have such wisdom and value for the wisdom of the elders. We need to shift our mindset from one that's, once you stop being a person in the workforce, you become, sort of useless to society, to one where we incorporate our elders and their wisdom. We could incorporate them into our schools. As was talked earlier, our schools could be community centers where we not only might have childcare facilities, we might also have human services touch points, and we might even have seniors who could come into the schools and help with after school programs. And we could have much more mixed intergenerational programs instead of the way we segment our society now. So there's a number of ways where if we support things like our state colleges and opportunities to have people educated and trained to care for seniors in place, they also can then remain members of the community in our schools. So we have to think outside the box and be creative with vision for the future. And that's one of the types of ways I'm going to do that as your next governor.
Thank you. Rebecca, you're up next.
Thank you. And I think the challenge here is that we know that the population, not only are we one of the oldest states, I think we're actually the third oldest, but that our rural communities tend to have older citizens on average, and they also tend to have fewer services. You know, I had the privilege of working in schools, including in some rural communities, and actually seniors were on our school boards. They worked in the school on a regular basis. We frequently had community meals with them. And one of the privileges of working in schools is that you do have this cross-generational opportunity to really celebrate the best of all of us. But there are also really concrete services people need. We need to have medical supports for people. And we know that if we don't have loan forgiveness for doctors, for example, there may not be enough primary care physicians in our rural communities to support our aging population. And Phil Scott tried to cut that. Fortunately, he was pushed back. We also do need to invest in training nurses, as I mentioned earlier. But there are many other things that we can use as well. And I've been talking to people around the different communities about what they feel they need. Ride sharing programs so that people don't have to drive themselves to get their medications and their food. Broadband has been critical, and the legislature did tremendous work this year around telemedicine. And as one home health aide told me, just think of if you haven't taken a 95-year-old senior to a medical facility in the middle of the winter, you understand how important broadband can be. So we need to lean into that. But there are also ways to support people who choose to age in place. And we've seen robust examples around different communities where they're hiring community nurses who can provide check-ins on seniors and their medications and work with municipal resources to help make sure that people have access to care, but also someone checking in to make sure they're okay. There are also opportunities for programs where people are waiting, perhaps because they may need assisted living at some point, but they're not there yet, or they can't get access, where we could compensate families to take people in and care for them until that becomes important. And at the Agency of Education, which administered nutritional programs statewide, including Farm to School, we also worked with adult food programs. So we provide nutritious meals to seniors in different parts of the state to supplement the food that they had access to, but also to create an opportunity for many of them to be with other individuals. So those are some of the kinds of supports that I work on as governor. But frankly, the other is we need to make our communities places where families can live, so we have young people who are able to work and provide the care and the services that our seniors need as they age. That means we need to make our communities family friendly by dealing with the cost of childcare, the high cost of housing, and making sure every community has a very good public school where people can send their children and know they're getting the absolute best opportunity we can provide them.
Thank you. Pat?
Well, Vermont does have an aging population, and we have to take care of our seniors. And we have Medicare and we have Medicaid, Medicaid being a state-run program and Medicare being a federal program. But, you know, my parents are both in their early 90s, and they both still live in the family home. And I think that, you know, people have to age with dignity. And, you know, they have caring children and they have caring relatives, but healthcare for all is a right and our moral responsibility. And we have to make sure that people who are older can stay in their home and lead productive and useful lives. But we also have to look at other people who, you know, like people who have disabilities and people who, you know, who have you know, illnesses that require them to be out of the mainstream for, you know, a period of time or maybe even forever. And, you know, it's important for the state government to recognize its responsibility and do the right thing for older people. You know, I think that you know, younger people can support the basic infrastructure of the state, but we have to be worried about attracting more young people into Vermont and doing the things that will attract them to come here and to lead productive lives and to pay taxes. And I think that, you know, that more racial diversity, affordable housing, certainly, and you know, family leave, all of those things are what make Vermont the attractive place that all of us who've been here for a long time believe that it is.
Thank you. I think we have, we're going to go one more for Susan, and then I'll do the final question, and that should wrap it up. So Susan, to you.
Yes, and the order this time is Rebecca, Pat, and David. Vermont state colleges are under serious financial strain. Indeed, our private colleges are as well. What proposals do you have to address the higher education situation in Vermont? So Rebecca, Pat, David.
Thank you. And I encourage anyone who is interested in reading more on this to go to my website and read some of the concrete recommendations I put out immediately when Chancellor Spalding put out his proposal. I believe our state college system is incredibly important to the economic vibrancy of our state, especially our rural communities. We have no future without it. I think there's several things that we can focus on immediately. I think we need to do bridge funding to help the state college cope until we have a more viable sustainability plan. I think there are opportunities to reduce the overall administrative costs by having the different colleges within the system work together in a streamlined administrative structure that allows us to free resources from administration and push it into frontline faculty. I think we need to do a hard audit across the entire state college system of how much physical footprint we need. We have a CCV campus in St. Johnsbury, an NVU Linden campus 10, 12 miles away. The heart of the system is the people, and there may be ways to partner across those campuses, and also frankly with the career and tech opportunities of the K-12 school system, the need for childcare, the need for adult education and workforce development. Instead of having multiple different programs, each with their own administration and facilities, serving similar or related ends, we need to look at whether we can share facilities in ways that allow us to realize the academic and the learning potential of these institutions. And we also have to deal with retention. We know that many of the students who start the college, state college system don't finish. There are some that are very successful. We need to look at the programs that are successful, figure out what it is they're doing that makes it possible for people to start to finish. Because if we can make everybody who starts finish, that alone will improve the revenues for the state college system. And we're going to need to invest more to bring down the cost of tuition. There are many opportunities, including redirecting resources from out-of-state programs that are duplicative of what we have here in state, so that we're investing in Vermont institutions that pay Vermont workers and keeping it vibrant. Those are just a couple of the things I would do. If we also think about the strategic role of the colleges in meeting our needs for preparation of people who are taking jobs in our high growth, high wage sectors, there's some real opportunities here. The state college systems actually started as teacher training.
We're at time.
And we can work on that to create nurses and to support our early childhood educators as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Pat, same question about Vermont state colleges.
Well, I think that we need to appreciate a technical education more than we do. It has value, and people who can do hands-on kinds of jobs contribute to our economy and are important to the state. My daughter, Sunrise, who is my campaign manager, grew up in Bennington County, and after she graduated from high school, she tried to get an education through the public schools, but she realized that that wasn't really for her, that she needed more of a technical education. She went to photography school, and she had to move to Brooklyn, New York, to really get the experience that she needed after she went to technical school for a year, so that she really became a success doing her photography. She had a photography business, and she has had her photographs on the covers of magazines, and she's associated with people who had the same sort of positive attitude about doing things on a hands-on kind of basis. She also has a vegan cookie business, and she wants to go back to it after I've won the election. But I've lured her up back to Vermont, which a lot of people my age want to do with their adult children. But technical education is important. My son went to the University of Vermont. He's had a successful career in doing forensic anthropology. He worked at the World Trade Center after the terrible calamity there. And, you know, it's not that there's anything wrong with having a regular college education. I mean, I went through 4 years of college, which I paid for, 3 years of law school, which I also paid for out of my own pocket. And, you know, I think that they're positive things for both kinds of educations. But in Vermont, I think especially we need to value our technical colleges more, and we need to invest more. I mean, when we spend more of our budget on the prison system than we do in higher education, there's something wrong with that. And I think that's something that will change.
Thank you so much. David.
Well, first, I was really pleased when the legislature included over $30 million in funding for the state colleges and UVM to get through this challenging time, rather than listening to Jeb Spalding's suggestion, which was actually known about by board members, including Governor Scott, as it's been discussed for the last year, and he's on the state colleges board. If you remember, when it first came out on Friday, the governor said, well, times are tough. We're going to have to look at things like this. And by the middle of the weekend, when I was holding a press conference with over many thousands of people watching on Facebook and YouTube, the state college pulled the plan for the vote on Monday. And the governor said, well, wait, maybe not. The governor can't shift and be reactionary in moments like this. He needs to lead. And he's known this challenge has been coming and not led with the major investment we needed. We need to invest in our state colleges. I was talking to some high school teachers on a roundtable, some of whom were from Lamoille County in Johnson. And they said their students' faces and energy just dropped when they heard those institutions were going to be closed. These state colleges are some of the only hope for a financial future for many of our rural Vermonters, particularly in central and northern Vermont, but frankly from all across Vermont. We need to make sure we keep hope for young people. We talk about the aging population. If we don't have hope for young people in this state, we're not going to have young people staying here, and we're not going to be drawing young people. Our state colleges are actually an opportunity because they're not in those dense urban areas. Because of COVID, we have a chance to draw students and fill our state colleges with full paying students to help with the financial burden of running the state colleges, not just with state bridge funding. I want to add also, not sure what just happened there, that we need to focus our state colleges on each of their strengths so that we have focuses like teachers, educators, we have the meteorology program, we have the social sciences at Johnson, and really highlight those so that we can bring Vermonters and out-of-staters into those jobs that are wanting in Vermont, needing employees. We have to recognize that NVU creates a $137 million impact in the northern rural part of the state. You've got to keep that going. It affects the stores and shops and housing and so many support for businesses. Many of the students that go to those schools continue on in local businesses. We can create more business partnerships with those colleges to create a path from college to economy for those kids. So there's a lot of opportunities in our state colleges. We must invest in them. We cannot squander this, and we have to bring student voices, business voices, teachers and parents, and rural voices into the process to build on those strengths. And the conversation out there is amazing. I'll wrap by concluding with the fact that in 20 plus years of organizing on major issues throughout Vermont, I have never seen a more swift community organic movement build. They had over 30,000 petition signatures in about a week. And if we don't listen to the people of Vermont and keep those state colleges going, we have completely missed the mark on listening to people in Vermont and listening to Vermonters. That's what a Zuckerman administration would do. Listen to Vermonters and implement policies for our future.
Thanks so much. So now we will go to Peter for the last round of questions this evening. Peter.
Tempted to ask a very specific question, but I'm going to go with a more general one that came in through the chat. There were actually 3 separate questions, one for Pat, one for David, one for Rebecca, but they all asked basically the same thing. What has in your professional experience brought you in terms of skill sets or experience that will make you a good governor? And we'll go Pat, David, and Rebecca.
Well, my training and experience as an attorney, I think is, is my skill set. And I'm proud to be a lawyer. I'm proud to be a trial lawyer. And, I think that, we all need to contribute whatever our skill sets are to help Vermont and to make Vermont a better place and to make it the place that we all know and love. But, I think that that's my skill set. If this is the wrapping up phase of the question, I guess it's the last question, I'd invite people to come by my office. It's on Main Street and 409 Main Street in Bennington. Stop by, say hello, or go to my website at winburn2020.com, and you'll see in fuller detail my responses to all the issues, my background and my training, and what qualifies me to be the next governor of the state of Vermont.
Thank you. David.
Well, thank you. I've got 2 lines of experience. One is 25 years of growing and building a small business in Vermont, meeting payroll, developing a marketable product, and building the soil, which as an organic farmer who's into regenerative agriculture, is part of the mindset of how you build soil for the future, is also how you build community for the future. You invest every year in steps to make it better rather than the declining way that some folks farm and that some of our extraction of labor doesn't build our communities. We need to invest in raising minimum wages. And on our farm, we've been increasing wages faster than inflation. And that's helped us keep employees returning, which is one of the real struggles for small businesses. We need to expand then also on my work as a legislator, bringing people into the process, whether it was marriage equality, the first GMO labeling bill in the country, cannabis reform, raising the minimum wage, including indexing it to inflation, although we have more to do because the governor vetoed those bills. That work and experience in the legislature is how one shows the collaborative approach, bringing people from all over Vermont with different political perspectives into the process so we can move Vermont forward in the leadership and visionary way that we have. You look at those bills, they've been heralded all across the country, usually, of course, marriage equality being one of them in that regard, where we shaped this country and the world with our leadership. And I was deeply involved in that. Leadership is what we need in the future, and that's what we need to beat Phil Scott. When I look at all of us here, I want to make sure whoever wins the primary beats Phil Scott. We have to remember the eye on the prize. And I think one of the things that I bring to the table with my experience and my collaborative work all across the state also is a connection to Vermonters from rural to Chittenden, from young to older, from the political process to people's living rooms into the process. And by doing that, I've built the foundation to beat Phil Scott. I had 7,000 more votes than him in 2018, and we all need to commit ourselves to building each other up so that whoever wins this primary has the best shot at beating Phil Scott. And I will say that I think with that experience and being at people's doors and living rooms all across the state, that situates me best to take on Phil Scott and win this election by having more votes than him in 2018 and building on those votes to win the general election. We all know it's going to be a hard race. When I got in, the pundits put this race as likely Republican, even with others already running. The day I entered, that week they moved it to lean Republican because they understood that connecting to Vermonters in all walks of life, from business to rural to urban, is the way to beat Phil Scott. And I'm prepared to do that. I'm ready to do that. But I will say if I lose the primary, I am committed 100% to helping each and every one of my opponents, whoever wins, win this election. And I hope they would do the same, from fundraising for them to using all the lists we have to build support to beat Phil Scott. And I think in this cast of folks, we have that teamwork approach, and I would look forward to others supporting in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And for the final response tonight, Rebecca Holcomb.
Thank you so much. Like David, I'm also a business owner and a co-owner of a small inn in the Northeast Kingdom in a community that's turning. And what that does is give me hope. It makes me realize that when we bring Vermonters together, they actually can make the change we need in our rural communities. And that's what keeps me motivated and inspired. I'm also somebody who took over a terribly demoralized and underfunded agency that was constantly being given new demands and new obligations, even as it lost funding. and was hyper politicized in the recent years. And I managed to build it back and make it punch above its weight. And that's what we're going to need to do when we're looking at a $550 million shortfall. We need to figure out how to work together to build up the strengths of our people and our state government workers to make sure that they can deliver on the critical priorities for Vermonters in a time when people are going to have great needs. I also am someone who's worked across the aisle my entire life. It's what you have to do, because in the end of the day, when you're governor, you're not just governor for the people who vote for you, you're actually governor for all Vermonters, including the ones who don't vote at all. And I will make sure that I do my darndest to make sure that every Vermonter in every county has the opportunity to succeed. But the last thing I want to say is, when I got into this race, I wasn't taken seriously. It was assumed it would be Phil or David. And I have had to work hard fighting that assumption the whole way to get people to know me and know my views, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I had to get people to take seriously the idea that someone who wasn't a politician and someone who was a woman could be governor again in Vermont. That kind of work, that kind of fight is what it's going to take to beat Phil Scott. I'm not getting support simply because I'm next in line or I've been building a list for 20 years. I have to earn it every day, and I will continue to fight for that privilege to be your governor until this race is done. And I hope to earn the votes of people joining us tonight. And I just want to end by thanking some of your own Washington County elected officials, Representative Tony Klein, Warren Kitzmiller, and also Senator Ann Cummings for their strong support and endorsements and for their counsel throughout this race. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming today. This election matters more than any in my lifetime. And it makes me feel positive and strong. And I know we can do this when people come up and show up on a Zoom call in the middle of the summer.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in on Zoom and everybody watching on Facebook, and especially our candidates for your really thoughtful answers to a wide range of questions. I want to remind people viewing that we're going to be hosting a Lieutenant Governor candidate forum in 2 weeks, Thursday, July 23rd, same time, same stations, and we'll be sending publicity out about that soon. So thanks again, everybody. Good night, and I'll leave you with one word, which is vote.
And I would like to add some closing remarks. I would like to thank our Democratic candidates for their insight into their experience and the unique perspective that they're into their views. I would also like to thank the stage crew. The monitors, Peter and Susan, did a fabulous job. The question monitor, James, who worked the chat box, our timekeeper, Renee, and our check-in, Jane. Without the stage crews, these things don't come off. So thank you so much for volunteering to be our stage crew. Thank you for those participating in the Zoom. And thank you for the 800 plus people who have been watching this tonight on Facebook in Washington County Democratic Facebook page and 2 other Democratic County Facebook pages. So thank you so much. We look forward to the Lieutenant Governor coming up on July 23rd. Thank you.
Make sure to vote.
Thank you so much, and everybody vote.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so
Good night.
much.
There, the live stream is now off.